So, chapter 1 recap, none to comfort her. We saw that came up 5 or 6 times. Now, does anybody remember the purpose of this affliction? Why was God afflicting Israel?
Creates humility. Affliction creates humility.
Oh, very good, very good. That's it. Steve's onto it. Yeah, the whole idea is that, as Jeremiah said there in that first lament, that God is right. He's well within all his rights, his justifications to do whatever he is doing to me right at the moment. And then the prayer at the very end, he had this idea of acknowledgements. He was acknowledging that the things that God was doing was true, it was just, and also putting God first. As in, there was no bitterness, there was no, oh, woe is me, why is this happening to me? All of his prayer in the last few verses was to put God first and acknowledge that this punishment was correct and it was justified. So that was a very quick summary of Lamentations 1. And if you get confused as you walk away from here 6 months down the road, just keep in mind that theme, none to comfort her. So that's what Lamentations 1 is around. All the comfort had left. So then the affliction comes in to create that humility. So then we come to Lamentations 2. There it goes. I thought it had disappeared for a while. I think like last time, can I get a reader, just a volunteer to read Lamentations 2 for us, please? And then we'll try and pull out the key theme of this lament. So, who would like to read Lamentations 2?
I can do it if you like. Oops.
Perfect, please do. Yep.
Just turn them down. Right, we're just turning one of the microphones. The sound's off.
The echo's really good there, Robert.
Yep, we'll fix that now.
That's good, thank you. Kind of.
Just turn it down on that thing.
There it is.
Right. That should be better.
Okay. Just before you do that, Robert, I think what'll make this easier for people, as Robert reads through this, please look at the first 9 verses, and then you'll get a really, really strong idea of what the theme of this lament is about. Take it away, Robert.
How the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with the cloud of his anger. He has hurled down the splendor of Israel from heaven to earth. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. Without pity, the Lord has swallowed up all the dwellings of Jacob. In his wrath, he has torn down the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He has brought her kingdom and its princes down to the ground in dishonor. In fierce anger, he has cut off every horn of Israel. He has withdrawn his right hand at the approach of the enemy. He has burned in Jacob like a flaming fire that consumes everything around it. Like an enemy, he has strung his bow. His right hand is ready. Like a foe, he has slain all who were pleasing to the eye. He has poured out his wrath like fire on the tent of the daughter of Zion. The Lord is like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all her palaces and destroyed all her strongholds. He has multiplied mourning and lamentation for the daughter of Judah. He has laid waste his dwelling like a garden. He has destroyed his place of meeting. The Lord has made Zion forget her appointed feasts and Sabbaths. In his fierce anger, he has spurned both king and priest. The Lord has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. He has handed over to the enemy the walls of her palaces. They have raised a shout in the house of the Lord as on the day of an appointed feast. The Lord determined to tear down the wall around the daughter of Zion. He stretched out a measuring line and did not withhold his hand from destroying. He made ramparts and walls of lament. He made ramparts and walls lament. Together they wasted away. Her gates have sunk into the ground. Their bars he has broken and destroyed. Her king and her princes are exiled among the nations. The law is no more, and her prophets no longer find visions from the Lord. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have sprinkled dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. My eyes fail from weeping. I am in torment within. My heart is poured out on the ground because my people are destroyed, because children and infants faint in the streets of the city. They say to their mothers, "Where is bread and wine?" as they faint like wounded men in the streets of the city, as their lives ebb away in their mothers' arms. What can I say for you? With what can I compare you, O daughter of Jerusalem? To what can I liken you that I might comfort you, O virgin daughter of Zion? Your wound is as deep as the sea. Who can heal you? The visions of your prophets were false and worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. The oracles they gave you were false and misleading. All who pass your way clap their hands at you. They scoff and shake their heads at the daughter of Zion. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? All your enemies open their mouths wide against you. They scoff and gnash their teeth and say, "We have swallowed her up. This is the day we have waited for. We have lived to see it." The Lord has done what he planned. He has fulfilled his word, which he decreed long ago. He has overthrown you without pity. He has let the enemy gloat over you. He has exalted the horn of your foes. The hearts of the people cry out to the Lord. O wall of the daughter of Zion, let your tears flow like a river day and night. Give yourself no relief, your eyes no rest. Arise, cry out in the night as the watches of the night begin. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. Lift up your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint from hunger at the head of every street. Look, O Lord, and consider, whom have you ever treated like this? Should women eat their offspring, the children they have cared for? Should priest and prophet be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? Young and old together in the dust of the streets, my young men and maidens have fallen by the sword. You have slain them in the day of your anger. You have slaughtered them without pity. As you summon to a feast day, so you summon against me terrors on every side. In the day of the Lord's anger, no one escaped or survived. Those I cared for and reared, my enemy has destroyed.
All right, thank you, Roberts. Yeah, so in those first 9 verses particularly, did anybody see the key theme that comes out in this lament?
God's anger.
Abandonment.
There is God's anger, that's right. Steve, you had something?
Abandonment.
Abandonment, yeah.
He has.
Oh, there it is. Very good, very good. Family Matters. It's like last week. Steve had the answers because he read it. Now Robert's got the answers. What we're looking at tonight, Lamentations 2, is all around the source of the affliction. Okay, if you remember back at the first of our classes, we looked at what the key themes of each chapter, each lament was going to be. Lamentations 2 is the source. And in the first 9 verses, you get that really, really, really clearly. In fact, it's so obvious, God just says it over and over and over and over. So a very quick exercise, in all of your separate little windows or bubbles, what we're going to call them, look through those 9 verses and count up how many times there is a reference to God doing this affliction. Okay, so you could be looking for themes like the Lord has done, or he has done, or I am doing it, or because of the Lord, or some other pronoun which refers to God himself. Count through those 9 verses and then tell me how many times it refers to God doing that affliction. There are some hints. How many
I got
times?
12.
About 12?
Oh, I got 25.
25,
25,
26.
okay.
Mm.
Any more takers on 25?
No, we were with Ruth, 25.
Gnomes is with Ruth, okay, 25.
Thanks, Gnomes.
I'll read mine twice.
All right. Darren turned on his microphone, but then he said nothing. So I think he's also reading his twice.
I'm not done, but there's lots.
Yeah.
I think there's more than 25.
Okay,
I reckon there's more.
give us the number, Steve.
Look, I got to 25 and I think that was about verse 7 or around about verse 7,
Yeah.
maybe. And then I
Okay.
lost count. I got sidetracked.
So there's definitely more than 25 then.
Well, sometimes it says he in one version, but not in the other version. So
That's a very good point that you have there, Ruth. I would say the first time I did this, and I think it was a New King James, I got about 24, 25. So you and Gnomes spot on. And then I read it again the other day in the NET, and I got about 31, 32.
that's right.
So, and it may also change when you're looking, okay, he is doing it, or the Lord has done, or some reference to God. So very clearly in these 9 verses, and I'm going to say there is at least 25 times, it is very, very clear that God is the one saying, hey, there's no excuse. There's nobody else that's done this. It is me that is doing this to you. You cannot blame Babylon. You cannot blame another country. You can't blame a different God, because it's me who is doing it to you. So that's the very key theme of this lament, is that God is saying, hey, the affliction comes from me, and here's what I am doing about that affliction. Steve, I think you brought this up before about his emotions. And that this is another good thing to look at. So again, in those 9 verses, what kind of emotions does God bring up in those verses as he brings that affliction to his people?
Anger,
Anger, yep.
enmity.
Yep. 6 times.
Enmity.
Has, yep.
Without pity.
Without pity, that's right, yep.
He's despised.
Despised, that's right, yep. In fact, there's fierce anger there, so it's even more than anger. It's like pure rage. Yeah. Again, yeah, we're just looking through those 9 verses, right? That the same idea of God is doing this, but how is he doing it? So the source of that affliction, and what kind of affliction is it? So anger comes through constantly in those verses. And then mercilessly, there's no stopping to what God is doing here. raging like a fire, he says in verse 3. Verse 5, making Judah to mourn. He's made every daughter on Judah to mourn and lament. The fierce anger again. Then verse 7, rejected and abhorred. Abhor is just one of those horrible things to think about. Oh, I don't get that away. Like, no, that's gross. It's disgusting. That's the sense of abhorring something, but in an angry way too. So it's not just disgust, but there is pure, oh, like, kill it, get rid of it, right? Verse 8 says he was even determined to tear down the daughter of Zion. All of this emotion that comes through and the source of this affliction from God. So I think, again, he is making it very, very, very clear to Judah and to the Jews. But it's obvious it's coming from me, but it's also obvious why I am doing it to you. And you cannot make any excuses. You cannot turn around and say, oh, look, what if he just made the sacrifice and then it's all good again? It's like God's like, no, had enough. Absolutely had enough. You've pushed me right to the extreme. Now, he's got the same kind of emotions that come through in Ezekiel 38, where Ezekiel tells us there at the very end of Armageddon, right? God is bringing all these nations upon Israel, once again to punish Israel. But he's talking there in Ezekiel 38 that his rage would mount up like fire, and his zeal and the fire of his fury he would declare to be a great earthquake on the land, saying all creation will shake in his presence. The mountains are going to topple, the cliffs will fall, all the walls will fall to the ground. All of these things, even calling for a sword, every man to fight against his brother. And why is he doing that? Because he says in verse 23, Ezekiel 38, verse 23, I am doing this to be glorified, that they shall know that I am the Lord. So there's a very clear purpose here and in Ezekiel 38 why God is angry. It's not just full-blown rage that just doesn't stop and burns everything up. Just like Ezekiel says, there is a purpose to God's anger. I want them to understand that I am to be glorified, that I am to be God, and that they should know who I am. Like I guess like parents, that at times where you slightly explode or punish, it's to bring your children back into line, to realize, okay, that's the parent that has authority over me, and they're the one that guides and directs and leads me. Instead of letting the balance get too far out of kilter, you bring it back again. So exactly like God is doing here, to punish and make them understand, hang on, the balance between God and you has to come back in line. Think about what he destroyed. All of the things that he destroys here in these 9 verses. Let's do that. Another quick exercise. Read through those 9 verses again and see exactly what God destroys in Judah and in Jerusalem. Feel free to speak up as you find them.
They're strongholds.
Beauty.
Perfect. Strongholds and their beauty. Yep.
Habitations.
Their habitations. Yep. Like their cities. Again, their strongholds. Yeah.
Kingdom and princes.
Their kings and princes. Exactly. All their royalty.
And the horn of Israel.
The horn of Israel. What do you think that might be?
Probably the king.
It could be the king. It could be the temple. It could be the priestly form of worship. Yeah.
Verse 6 is meeting place with them.
Sorry, Steve, I missed that one.
Verse 6, he's destroyed the place where he meets with them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. As we know from Ezekiel, particularly where Ezekiel describes the glory of God departing from that meeting place. So these two prophets were writing around the same time, right? So these are the things that God did destroy. These are the things that Judah took pride in because they were what she saw strength in. The fortified cities, or the entire army. It has there in verse 3. Oh, the horn of Israel. Okay, sorry, I interpreted the horn there, Ruth, as being the army, but it could well be other strengths as well.
Yeah, wherever the power lies.
Yeah.
Right, okay, yeah.
It is used of the king in some contexts in scripture.
True, absolutely true.
Like the horn of David talking of Jesus.
Yeah. Even to the point that God has taken away the palaces and he's broken down the bars and the gates. So the entire city was a thing that the people took very strong pride in, saying, nobody can destroy this, nobody can overcome it. It's God's city. We're good living here, doing what we want to do because nothing's ever going to happen to us. And now God's come along and said, hey, look, the thing that's taken that away is me, because you focus too much on that instead of me. And that's why Jeremiah says in verse 17, well, God has done all of this. He's planned to do all of this. In fact, he's fulfilled his promises that he threatened long ago. Very explicit there in verse 17, isn't he? The Lord has the Lord has done what he purposed. He's fulfilled his word which he commanded in the days of old. He's thrown down and has not pitied. We could go through a lot of different prophecies and Deuteronomy, through all the Psalms and some of the other prophets and say, yep, that's exactly right. God did say in times gone past, where he threatened a long time ago, look, if you put too much confidence in the wrong things, I will take those things away. And that's exactly what's happened here. And it's God that's doing it to it. It's God that has planned to do it, and it is God that has now done it against his own people. Jeremiah 5 has again where he prophesies to his people to say the same thing. I'll just read it out to you there. So Jeremiah 5 from verse 10, the Lord commanded the enemy march through the vineyards of Israel and Judah and ruin them. But don't destroy them completely. Strip off their branches, for these people do not belong to the Lord. For the nations of Israel and Judah have been very unfaithful to me, says the Lord. These people have denied what the Lord says. They have said, this is not so. No harm will come to us. We will not experience war or famine. The prophets will prove to be full of winds. The Lord has not spoken through them. So let them say what they want to say, right? They always believed nothing's going to happen to us. No harm will come to us. None of these words that these prophets speak is ever going to come to pass, because they put so much confidence in these strengths that they kept looking back on. Have a think then, like, what are strengths that we rely too much on? What are strengths in our natural selves that we are asked to get rid of or try and destroy? So Paul says in 2 Corinthians, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal but mighty in God for pulling down of strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. So some of the things that we focus too much on at times, that we put too much confidence in instead of confidence in God himself. And these are things that God can destroy. He can very quickly take away in an instant, as he did to Judah and to Jerusalem. So the things that God destroyed, even the time of the Corinthians, were perceived to be religious or godly or things that serve him. But the motivation is always focused on the wrong way, right? The motivation's often in the glory of a building or in the music that's sung or in the way that people dress or in the sort of the man-made rules and restrictions that we put upon ourselves. So here's the question, and I really do want to open this up for a bit of thought, because it's good to challenge ourselves. What strongholds do we sometimes keep holding on to that don't actually keep faith in God? We'll put some examples to you. Churches,
I was going to say
songs.
science.
Go, Gnomes. Yep.
Science. Trust the science.
Trust in science.
Well, you know, it's the science that actually teaches. A lot of the science is the science that teaches that God doesn't exist, and is looking for an explanation outside the Bible. I'm not saying all science is wrong, but it could be a focus.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Thinking if we know lots about the Bible, we know how to be a Christian.
Knowing too much. That's a very good point, Jackie. Yeah.
Bible technical knowledge.
Too many strong words, you mean?
Thinking we can do things in our own strength instead of putting our strength in God.
Yeah. But do you have any examples, Ruth?
Well, it can happen in any way. I mean, we tend to naturally do that. Some situation comes along and we immediately think, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Not let's go pray to God about it and see what he might direct me to do. Anyway, I do it all the time.
You're right. And I truly believe we all do it too. Yep. All right. I had some other examples, more sort of religious examples potentially. You could almost say you can put confidence in a hall, too much in a building instead of a community. Say constitution, about what your members believe in, instead of the principles. We put too much emphasis on the practice of things instead of the principles around what we believe. I don't know, songs. I think we're pretty good at PK for music. Really good at that. We don't stick too much to certain styles or words, etc. So yeah, but it's a very good exercise to go through and say, okay, what do I maintain stronghold on that has a facade of true worship, but actually doesn't give me strength in my worship with God or my belief in God. And I really believe that's what God was doing here with Judah, driving home that fact. All the facades he took away. We can see that really clearly in the next few verses. It was their religious hypocrisy, right? So when he says in verse 6 and 7 that God has destroyed what they were half-heartedly using to worship him, right? These are just a shadow of faith. So there was violence to the temple. There was destruction of God's meeting place. The feasts and Sabbaths were now forgotten. So you took away those feasts and Sabbaths. He took away the king and the priest. The altar was taken away as well. The temple not only abandoned, but destroyed at the time. And the walls of the palace destroyed. All these things of religious facade or religious hypocrisy, that they took too much time to have attention on the acts of it instead of the spiritual belief behind it. Just like from the very time of Moses giving the law through Leviticus and Numbers, and the people focused too much on the legal side of it. Then you get to Deuteronomy and it tries to turn it to a spiritual. But they could never grasp the spiritual side of things. So now God has taken away all of these facades and left them with nothing. Really good verse that Ezekiel has again in Ezekiel 33. right? Where he's saying to Ezekiel, as a prophet, as God's servants, these people, they are going to come and hear the word that comes from the Lord. They will come to you in crowds. They will sit in front of you as my people. They will hear these words, but not obey them. For they talk lustfully. Their heart is set at their own advantage. Realize that to them you are like a sensual song, a beautiful voice, a skilled musician. They hear your words, but they do not obey them. And when all this comes true, and it certainly will, then they will know that a prophet was among them. It's exactly the same way they're holding on to these beautiful things that God is giving them, but then turn around and do their own lustful thing. They talk lustfully and deceitfully about their own way of life once they've left that facade to go and live their own life. So God is saying in those few verses there, I'm removing that strength out of you as well. Now there's some hidden consequences to their actions. We get that coming through in a few verses there. Verse 10, the elders and the virgins. These are consequences of the actions that they performed and the consequences of affliction coming upon them. The children are starving. The children are faint. They're dying in the mother's arms. Even the nations saying, well, what can I compare to you? There's nothing that looks like what God has done to us. Nothing at all. So that's sometimes something that people don't even consider, is it? Happy enough to let a few sins slip through, or we think that the life that we're living has no consequence because it's just my life, it's all good. But as Jesus says in the parable of the servants who couldn't pay his debts in Matthew 18, that servant was forgiven, then he goes out and tries to get something off another servant who was owing him debt. But the king comes back because he was not able to repay the debt. The Lord ordered him to be sold along with his wife and the children and all his possessions. So there's always consequences beyond our actions. When affliction does come upon us, when punishment does come upon us, it's not just upon us. It's upon the elders, it's upon the virgins, it's upon the children. It's upon the servant and his family and his children and all of his possessions too. So these are some of the hidden consequences that were coming through Judah and Jerusalem at the time that Jeremiah was writing this lament. Then there's the final removal of dignity. God is bringing this affliction upon them, but for them to truly learn what it is, there's the sense of a final removal of dignity. Maybe they've fled with just one last piece of historic strength or one last piece of facade of religiousness. And God is saying, no. All those who pass by, they're going to mock you, they're going to snare at you, they're going to, like this, like the really snaring, what's happened to you, And it repeats again in verse 16, the same gloating, sneering and gnashing, look at those people, like feel that indignity that comes through in that message. Maybe that's what's gone on. They'd fled to Egypt, the ones that had gone into Babylon. They'd taken up one little piece of their past life. Even those that were still here in Jerusalem. And God is saying, now there's one more thing I have to do. I have to let you feel that dignity, take that away, so that all you have left is to come back to me. And back to that verse 17 again. God has enabled the enemy to gloat over you. God has enabled the enemy to come along to absolutely destroy you because he is bringing that affliction upon you. But that enemy is now taking away every piece of dignity that you had left. There's a really good verse there in Obadiah. You can look at that in your own time. What Obadiah is saying there, and this is where Babylon went wrong, is don't gloat too much in your power over somebody that you've now destroyed. You should not gloat when your relatives are suffering. You should not rejoice over Judah when they are destroyed. You shouldn't boast when people are suffering adversity. All these things about how you should have the right character when you come to dominate over somebody. And you think about the wrong sense of character, the mocking and the sneering and the ridicule. Think about Christ as he's up on the cross and all those people walking past him like, look at that fool. Right? That's the final removal of dignity in his life as he's strung up there to give his life for us. Just as it's happening here for Judah and Jerusalem. And then we come to the prayer. Kind of skip a few verses, then this prayer to God not to forget. This prayer to God essentially telling God, asking God just to take a moment. Look, O Lord, and consider who you've afflicted. It's an acknowledgement, absolutely, that they now realize God is the one doing this. So now Jeremiah is turning around and saying, in the position of the people, he's turning to God and saying, look at who you're doing this to. So it's trying to remind God, I understand we need to be punished. I also understand who you are. I understand you're a merciful God. I understand you're compassionate. I understand that your anger and your wrath is just for an instant. So please look at who you're punishing and realize what you're doing to us. That's why part of that prayer seems to repeat the same afflictions. Right? The young boys and old men, they're lying dead in the streets. The young women and the young men, they're fallen by the sword. You've killed them when you're angry. You slaughtered them without mercy. It's like, look, God, look, you're doing this to us. Look at what you're doing. Please think about what you're doing. Ezra has some incredible words when the people came back to the land. 70 years later on, Ezra had these words in chapter 9. From the days of our fathers to this day, our guilt has been great. As in we acknowledge what's happened, we know that we were wrong. Because of our iniquities, we and our kings and priests have been delivered into the hands of the kings of the earth and put to the sword and captivity, to pillage and humiliate. You see that snaring, that gloating, that humiliation, as we are to this day. But now for a brief moment, grace has come from the Lord our God to preserve for us a remnant and give us a stake in his holy place. Even in our bondage, our God has given us a new life and light to our eyes. So you could see God's answer to Jeremiah's prayer here in verse 20 is then answered through Ezra some 60 or 70 years later on. For a brief moment, grace has now come from the Lord our God to preserve that remnant. You can think of others who put themselves in that same position to offer that kind of acknowledgement. Moses, who stepped in to stop God from wiping out the nation. Micah's prayer at the end of Micah 7. You know, that prayer where he's saying that God would throw the sins and rebellion as far as the east is from the west, or toss them right into the depths of the sea. And Daniel also has a similar prayer in chapter 9. O Lord, hear, O Lord, forgive, O Lord, give heed and act. Do not delay for your own sake. O my God, because your city and your people are called by your name. As an acknowledging who God is, turning back to God, and realizing that we do need God. All the strengths that they've relied upon, that God has now taken away. They've got none of that to turn back to. So all they can turn to is now turn to God. Turn to God, please hear us, please forgive us, please heed and act, and don't delay. Because we need you, and we are called by your name. So that is Lamentations 2, the source of the affliction.